Good evening and welcome. Please. My name is Colin Jones, and as the president of City Club, I have the pleasure of welcoming you all and doing the thank yous before handing off the hard work to other people. This is an exciting night for all of us. City Club, and I hope for you. Thank you for the cheering. This is great. Please cheer when you feel like it. After months of research and many more months of preparing for the report's release, it is finally here. This report, entitled New Government for Today's Portland, Rethinking 100 Years of the Commission System, is in some ways the culmination of more than a century of City Club's work. City Club was founded in 1916, just 3 years after the commission form of government was adopted in Portland. Our first members were early critics of the commission system, as they felt it was inefficient and had done little to reduce corruption. Their response to those inefficiencies and that corruption was to create an organization that brings people together to work on solutions to the most intractable problems facing Portlanders. Over the last century, City Club has contributed to major victories across the city, including an expose that revealed city corruption in the 1940s, a plan to establish Forest Park, and recommendations for establishing the Multnomah County Library System. One of my favorites. But one issue has eluded City Club all these years. Is the commission form of government really the best that Portland can do? And if not, how can we fix it? Tonight, we'll share with you what we found when we put those questions to a City Club research committee. We'll also share our committee's recommendations for a new system of government, one that is not only more efficient and effective, but also equitably represents our diverse and growing city. Yeah, that's exciting, right? If you haven't seen the report yet, you can download it at any time by going to City Club's website, www.pdxcityclub.org/commission. I should also let you know that you can begin voting on that research tonight. The nature of City Club's work is you vote, our membership votes, and tells us, is this the position that we're going to advocate for? You'll see set up right here at the front of the room at a table where you can fill out your ballot and seal it in a secrecy envelope. To make sure your ballot will be counted, you also need to fill out a second envelope and put your name on it so we can verify that you're a current member. The system is in place to protect your privacy and the integrity of the vote, so thank you for your help on it. I'm also pleased to announce that we will begin a new research project that builds on this report. Very soon, we'll be putting together a committee to consider alternative voting methods and to make a recommendation for a new voting system that leads to more equitable election results. Stay tuned for more information about how you can apply to serve on that research committee. City Club staff should be announcing that in the next couple of weeks. In a moment, I'm going to turn the stage over to Zeke Smith, who will be your MC tonight, and as I mentioned, will do all of the hard work. But I just wanted to say a few thank yous before we begin. First, I'd like to thank the research committee for all of their hard work and patience on this project. If you are here, please stand if you're able. Big thank yous to Ken Fairfax, the committee chair, Amanda Manjarez, the committee vice chair, Dylan Stike, the lead writer, Sarah Carlin Ames, Christopher Bacher, Tina McNerthney, Lynn Peterson, Vinay Prasad, Mona Schwartz, Thomas Work, and Liang Wu. Let's really amp up that applause. Thank you. On behalf of City Club's Board of Governors, I want to let you know that you've done incredible work, which I'm sure you're well aware of, and we are so grateful for the time and energy and insights that you put into this report. I'd also like to thank City Club's Research Board for their guidance during this project. Same thing, if you're here, please stand if you're able. Thank you to Jaboa Lake, Jack Quinn McNichol, the Research Board Chair, Shweta Morthy, Steve Percy, Jonathan Radmacher, and Andrew Scott. Let's give them a round of applause. A number of sponsors also helped put on today's program. Thank you to Alchemy Code Labs, the Coalition of Communities of Color, the Portland Business Alliance, and Right Public Affairs for supporting community research and the opportunity for all Portlanders to participate in imagining a new form of government. Let's give them an applause. And as always, we are incredibly grateful to our media partners, Open Signal and X-Ray FN, for helping us reach more people in Portland and throughout Oregon. One more round of applause. Finally, I'd like to give you an opportunity to earn some applause yourself. You too can support this important work and the staff members and the committees that are making all of this research happen. Individual gifts are a big part of what makes City Club's work possible to do this research and inform the public. When you have a moment tonight, please consider a gift to City Club to help us take this research even further. We're hoping to make space for conversations and communities throughout Portland, and we'll be kicking off the new research that I referenced, building on the findings of this report. Your donations make all of that possible. Thank you all so much for supporting City Club. I am so excited to have everybody here. I hope you're all eager to dig into the conversation, and to get started, please join me in welcoming Zeke Smith.
Great, thank you, Colin. And thanks everybody for being here. He's right, you can't see a thing. It's like it's just me here. I'm just practicing in my own room. Really glad you're all here today. This is an exciting time to be connected to the City Club. Oh, I forgot to mention Zeke Smith, City Club member. That will be important tonight as people later on get an opportunity to engage in this discussion and dialogue with us. It's my privilege to be your guide for the evening through the conversation that we're going to have about the commission form of government. So first, we're going to get a history lesson from Kristen Eberhardt of the Sightline Institute. We'll hear after that from 5 different people who've all worked with and sometimes in Portland's commission form of government. They're going to share the challenges they've experienced and why Portland needs to take a close look at a better way to govern. So after that, we're going to take an intermission, opportunity for folks to have whatever break you need. Remember, the bar is open in the back, so drink may be helpful. And then we'll come back together and we're going to jump into a conversation both about the report, hear from you all, and have some opportunity to move forward. So as is clear, the City Club would not be the City Club of Portland without questions and comments from City Club members. So we have 2 microphones, one for people who wish to approve the research and one for people who wish to reject it. So, and if you have questions for our speakers, they'll come back up and there will be an opportunity to ask those as well. You do need to be a City Club member to step up to the mic tonight, and we'll ask that you keep your comments and or your comments leading into a question to under 60 seconds. So if you're ready to come up and if you have multiple pages that you wanted to get through, start working now on how you're going to kind of condense that into your finest points. Great. Let's see. After the questions and statements, we'll let you know what's happening with City Club's report after tonight and how you can get involved and be involved. Good. So I was asked to provide just a small anecdote of my own experience with the city, our form of commission government. As I thought about it, I thought, okay, I have quite a few examples from when I was the chief of staff of Portland Public Schools, but I don't know that it's appropriate for me to share any of those since I can't see who's in the audience, and there might be former city council members in the audience who those stories are all directly about. So I just thought I'd kind of like sweeten the pie a little bit. Great, so now that we've got clarity about what we're doing here, my job will be to keep us on track. I'll come back up and do introductions of folks along the way and let us know when we're gonna hit into an intermission. But first, we get to hear from a number of wonderful individuals. Please welcome, or join me in welcoming Kristen Eberhard, a senior researcher at the Sightline Institute. Kristen, you're up.
Hi. Just me up here. Can't see anything. Okay, so Portland has had a commission form of government for more than 100 years. But where did this come from, and how well has it been serving Portland? So the commission form of government came about in the aftermath of a crisis. In 1900, Galveston, Texas was hit by a massive hurricane. It killed 12,000 people. It reduced the city to rubble. And after the storm, the survivors were faced with the task of rebuilding what was then Texas's largest city. So a group of wealthy businessmen in the city, known as the Deepwater Committee, thought that appointed experts who were had expertise in different areas of public finance, public works, would be better, faster, more efficient at getting the city back on its feet than elected commissioners who would have to get up to speed on how the city worked. So they wanted the governor of Texas to appoint these experts to get the city going fast. Through some public challenge and some court challenge, it ended up they couldn't just appoint all of the elected officials, so they did have to elect them. But that idea that they should be experts, each in a different area, and that would be more efficient and less corrupt, really stuck. And this new kind of government, this commission of experts, became popular across Texas, and then it spread to other states. And part of the reason was that at that time there was problems with corruption in local government. And so some progressive era figures like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson thought this would be a great way to sort of grow up a crop of local government experts. And then chambers of commerce really loved the idea because they thought it would be good for keeping government nimble and efficient. So throughout the 1900s, Portland and other cities were really suffering with this corruption, as I said. So in Portland, they like to call it the spoils system, that when you won office, you would reward your financial sponsors and backers with the spoils of your win, which was a city job. And whoever had been doing that city job, maybe well, who knows, they went away, and the financial backers came and took the city job. So people were upset about this, and the idea of this new system that could offer expertise and less corruption seemed attractive. So in 1913, just when this commissioner government fad was kind of at its peak, the Portland business community put it on the ballot in Portland, and it squeaked to victory, 250 by a margin of 252 votes out of more than 35,000 cast. So that was 1913. Portland adopted it right at the end of the fad. After that, it really started going downhill. Go Portland. At that time, in 1913, there were about 500 cities across the country that were using this commissioner form, but they all started dropping it soon after that. And even Galveston, Texas, which had, initiated this form and for ending corruption, well, somewhat ironically, public outrage over corruption in the commissioner form of government ended that model in 1960. Galveston moved to the council manager model, which is what they still use today. So that's the history. How has it been working in Portland? So just a little more background on how the commissioner form in general works, and then how Portland has kind of made it its own. So in general, the United States really cherishes the idea of separation of powers, right? So we have a legislative branch, which is the elected officials who write the laws, and we have an executive branch, which is elected officials and experts who implement the laws, and then a judicial branch, which interprets the laws, and we try and keep those separate. The commissioner form puts them together. So you have both the lawmaking ability and executive power. So you're both a lawmaker and kind of a CEO of a bureau. You also have some quasi-judicial powers to make decisions about zoning appeals and other legal procedures. So that means that a single commissioner could write a law, draft an ordinance, lobby their fellow commissioners to pass that law, implement that law through their bureau, and then decide an appeal from a constituent appealing that law. So that's a lot. It's a lot. But Portland actually innovated on the commissioner form of government. So you'll remember that the sort of attraction of this form was that you would have experts in different areas of public works. And so in places that have used in the past, the commissioner form, they would often have like a public works position and a public safety position and a public parks position, and you would run for that thing, which means you would run on why, what your background is in public works and what you're going to do with the Public Works Bureau. But in Portland, so the mayor appoints you to a bureau and can change that appointment every 6 months if, hypothetically. And so voters don't know what bureau you're going to be in. You don't know what bureau you're going to be in when you're running, so you can't say, like, hey, here's what I want to do with parks, because you might not get parks. So that kind of like the basic idea of the commissioner form is actually, even that is somewhat diluted in Portland. So a piece that is really important to talk about that's just linked with the commissioner form is at-large voting. So at-large means that everyone runs in the city as a whole, but we vote for each of them separately. So we vote for position A, B, C, and D. And the result of that way of voting is that if 50% plus one of the voters want a particular kind of candidate, they can get 100% of the seats on the council. So the other voters who wanted a different kind of candidate get 0 votes on the council. And the commissioner form kind of basically requires at-large voting, because if you combined districts with this CEO power over the bureau, it's kind of a recipe for pork barreling. You might end up with, Southeast Portland gets, the best garbage services, and North Portland gets the best police response rates, and, West Portland gets the best parks, which would not be cool. That would not, be the city that works. So the fact that at-large is really like linked with the commission form is another reason that the commission form died out everywhere else decades ago. Because in 1965, the US passed the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act says that it's illegal to create any voting law that discriminates against racial or ethnic minorities. And many communities that had at-large voting, remember, if you were 50% of one, you can get 100% of the seats on the council. So if you were in the minority, you couldn't get any. So they successfully challenged at-large voting systems in court, showing that they were discriminating against minorities. And when a court found that at-large discriminated, they had kind of 2 basic remedies that they would do. So one is districts. Everyone knows about districts. But an interesting thing that you might not know about districts, single winner districts that is that in order for it to be a remedy for a Voting Rights Act violation, the jurisdiction has to have 1 or more majority-minority districts. That means they have to have a place in the city where all the African American people live, or all of the Latinx people live, or all of the Asian American people live, and then you can draw a line around them. And so, somewhat ironically, this particular Voting Rights Act remedy depends on racial segregation. So the advantage of this Voting Rights Act remedy is that when you have that situation, the people in a minority-majority district have a great shot at getting representation. The downside is that people who don't happen to live in that district don't have a great shot at representation, and the durability of the solution depends on racial segregation continuing over time. So you want another remedy, right? So the other remedy is multi-winner districts with an alternative voting system. So lots of places don't have a minority-majority district. For example, Portland. Portland has about 1/3 of the people living here are people of color, but there's going to be a map. Yeah. Okay, so I asked a map maker to try and draw a minority-majority district, and it's impossible. The highest that he could get was 38%. So lots of places are like this, like Portland. So basically, we do have people of color, but they're a little more spread out. I mean, there are places where they're more concentrated, but they're spread out through the city. And so multi-member districts with multi-winner ranked choice voting, you can get a voice no matter who you are, no matter where you live, and no matter how that changes over time. So these systems, multi-winner, cumulative voting, or ranked choice voting, are still in place in hundreds of cities and counties across the country where they are successfully electing much more representative councils. So as an example, the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, has been using multi-winner ranked choice voting for decades, and they have a somewhat similar racial diversity to Portland. And for since 1995, you can see that on their city council and their school board, where they use multi-winner ranked choice voting, they have much more representative results than Portland has had over that same period of time. So Portland has a striking lack of racial representation. Though we have, right now, one of the most diverse city councils in Portland's history, it's important to remember that only 3 people of color and 9 women have ever served on city council. And Joanne Hardesty is the first woman of color ever elected to the city council, and the first person of color in a generation. So that's bad. But the good news is it gets worse. We also have a lack of geographic representation and socioeconomic representation. So most councilors are homeowners, and they're mostly coming from the same types of neighborhoods. They themselves are homeowners, but they're also coming from home-owning neighborhoods. It's uncommon to see city council members who live in St. John's or Park Rose or David Douglas. I have a map. Next one. Yeah, so there's one dot over there, east of 82nd. That's Randy Leonard, the only one. For more than a century, we have seen the results that at-large voting and the commissioner form of government have gotten us in Portland, and it's time for us to think, how can we make this work better? Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. I don't know, I haven't often seen history so pithy. I appreciated it. So I knew about Ada Lovejoy and whoever that other guy was, and the flip of the coin, and Boston, and Portland, and then I've kind of come to terms with the fact that you might call us the other Portland. I don't, but you might. But Galveston? Like, that's pretty new to me. Texas? Anyway, interesting. Let's move along. So we want to shift the conversation now to the problems in our current system of government. So each of the 5 people you're about to hear from are here to share their personal experiences and views of Portland's commission form of government. These are not necessarily the views of the research committee or of the city club. These are all independent individuals. And to model what that looks like, I would like to invite up first Jesse Beeson, the CEO of the Northwest Health Foundation, to talk about the lack of opportunities for people of color to serve in the city. Jesse?
All right, so I did spend some time working in the commission form of government, but I'm not gonna talk about that. So growing up, my parents worked long hours. It meant that my sister and I spent plenty of time with the television, and I became somewhat obsessed with superhero shows. I'm talking Wonder Woman, Bionic Woman, $6 Million Man, Incredible Hulk, the classics. But I admit that while I loved these shows, I was more drawn to the unusual hero among them. So while everyone was watching Adam West, Zoink and Pow the villain, I was watching Robin. And growing up in the white suburbs, it was B.A. Baracus, aka Mr. T, who stood out to me on the A-team. Because I watched the world treat my dad like a big, tough black guy, and my dad do his best to act it, when deep down, like B.A., he was a softie with a fear of flying. And of course, if you know me, you know I'm also a bit of a Trekkie. So while Riker fought his way and Picard reasoned his way out of sticky situations, it was Guinan who really saved us all. These were the unusual heroes of my youth. I saw a part of myself in these mythical people. They stood up for what was right, even when they were not the star of the show. And they made me want to be a better person. But it would be many years later that I would discover that true heroes live among us. They are real. And my modern day hero, Barbara Jordan, was one of them. So Barbara Jordan was a congresswoman from Texas, and she was also a lesbian, and I'm going to quote her. She said at the height of the Watergate hearings, when our democracy seemed to hang in the balance, quote, "We the people." It is a very eloquent beginning. But when the preamble to the Constitution of the United States was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people. Folks, I believe that we face a similar proposition tonight. Should we, the people of Portland, amend our own city's constitution to expand our definition of we the people? Should we transform a system of governance to one that is more representative of all Portlanders, with our many creeds, our ethnicities, and lived experiences? When only 9 women have served on the city council in 168 years, isn't it time we change our city's constitution? When just 3 people of color have served on the city council in 168 years, isn't it time we change our city's constitution? When a decade ago I was casting my vote for the nation's first black president and a modern-day hero, Portland had an all-white, all-male, mostly West Side city council. And that was democracy? How can we think, without any changes, that we have one now? And when more than a quarter century separates Joanne Hardesty from Dick Bogle, our last person of color to sit on city council, can we please do better in the next quarter century? And when just 5 people steer the fates of 650,000 of us from their dais on city council, is that really representation? No. And when you cannot run and win office in this city without a Rolodex of rich people, a pedigree, or sore lips from kissing the pinky rings of too many fat cats, shouldn't we do something about it? Man, I think we should. And tonight you have and you will hear even more reasons why we must. But I'd like to end with Barbara Jordan. She said on the floor of the Democratic Convention just months before Charlie Hales ousted Dick Bogle in the 1992 elections, quote, "This country can ill afford to continue to function using less than half of its human resources, brain power, and kinetic energy." Indeed, Portland is missing out on a tremendous amount of talent and energy and good ideas because we've so narrowly defined by law and by practice who can and should rise to lead our city. Now, I've met the next Barbara Jordan. In fact, I've met the next 10 Barbara Jordans. Our city is full of heroes across every quadrant and of every color, and it is time we let them lead us toward the city that we deserve to be. It is time that we, the people, amend Portland's Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. I love it when you preach. And anybody who can go from Barbara Jordan to Charlie Hales and back to Barbara Jordan, thank you. So, let's hear from our next guest speaker, Misha Webley from the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods. Misha's going to share the highlights of the problems North and East Portland face in getting heard by our government. Misha?
Man, I need a new headshot. Tell you that. You guys just pulled that off the website, didn't you? Okay. Good evening. My name is Misha Webley with the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been representing the neighborhoods of Inner North and Northeast Portland since 1974. Now, the coalition system it's an interesting beast, right? A lot of people don't even know it exists. We're essentially a function of government that sits outside the government. We fill the hole that our at-large system leaves without the representation, the direct representation from neighborhoods like ours and around the city. We were started by a group of residents, a group of community members and neighborhoods in this area, really to get our voice heard. Now, Northeast Portland, as I'm sure a lot of you know, was, up until very recently, predominantly black neighborhood, group of neighborhoods. And, well, a bunch of people got sick of being disinvested from and kind of neglected by the city. For a very long time, for decades, in fact, our community here was devastated repeatedly. We had the city used eminent domain to really split apart these communities. It began with Interstate 5. It continued with the Memorial Coliseum, with the expansion of Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. And eventually, we said, now wait a minute, no one from City Hall ever comes over here. No one even knows what's going on here. All of these very consequential things, decisions, policies are coming from over there. So let's band together, let's fill that gap. And we were still are one of 7 coalitions across the city, and we represent our communities best way we know how. Really, we're a liaison between the residents, our community members, and City Hall. This one right here, this neighborhood right here, we're part of NECN's district, and always glad to be representing. Now, I was telling my brother I was going to do this, and I started explaining, and I got excited. I said, well, we're talking about how to overthrow the government. And he said, he was like, I got his attention, right? So, but then I started talking and explaining, and I could hear him moaning. And he says, that sounds like the most boring revolution. And it is. But what I started explaining to him, and I think the best way to understand it is this. Let me take a quick poll. Who here is a fan of United States House of Representatives, Congress? Really? Okay, got a few. Yeah, got a few, okay. Second question, who here is a fan of their United States representative, their congressperson, their senator? It's a lot more, right? Yeah, that's what we thought. And why is that, right? Our representatives, they come from here. They know our area, whether it's your city, our state, our county, our neighborhood, and they're accountable to us. We pay their salary. They have to come back here. We give them side eye in the grocery store. We don't like what they're doing. So we tend to have that relationship. Now, what if I told you next year, 2020, we're going to do things a little different? We're going to vote for the United States Congress. We're going to vote for senators at large for the whole country. What would that mean? Well, that would mean the whole country, if you want to run for office, you got to convince everybody that you should be in there, one of 400 some odd seats. And what would end up happening? It'd be crazy, right? What end up happening is, few people most people from DC, probably New York, California, maybe Texas, and everybody else be out of luck. All the representatives come from a few different places, speak to a few different interests. It'd be un-American, right? That's not the way it's designed. Geographical representation is the key to our whole democracy. Founding fathers recognized that. That's how we have it this way. Unfortunately, it's not how we do in Portland. Really, that's exactly what we do in Portland, what I mean. And the consequences of that are very real. And I think it's hard to understand sometimes, but I don't think we need a metaphor to understand. So bring it back here. I grew up in this neighborhood. It's right down the street, right down 30th. And so did most of the people that I work with at the Northeast Coalition. We're all very proud of that. You meet anybody from Northeast, they're always very proud of it. And what we experienced going through the last few decades is upheaval, again, is our neighborhood being really reimagined, let's say. It's very diplomatic. And what we think about at NECN and elsewhere, and when we're laying in bed at night sometimes, is you think about where were we at that time? Where were we to be a voice for the changes we saw happen? At the time we were young and maybe getting angry by some of the things that were happening. But you may know, of course, if I need to tell anybody, Northeast Portland is, according to The Atlantic, one of the most gentrified areas in the country, the whole country. So, and that's happened in the last 20 years, much of it even shorter than that. But where were we? That's the question, right? And how would things have been different if it was someone's job to look after our community? That's the question. If it was someone's job to strike that balance between the communities that were already here and the communities that were coming in. There's nothing wrong with change. We need to find a balance. We need to find the balance of the competing interests. And it's not just Northeast. I think a lot of people in this room probably feel the last 5, 10 years, same questions are coming up around Portland, all around. You think about the downtown core, Old Town. You think about how would that area look different if it was someone's job to speak to the needs of people who are living there on the street in abject poverty, dealing with all sorts of issues. And the business owners that are down there, the residents that are down there, artists who are working in the studios, people who just want to visit downtown core, they're not so sure. If it was someone's job to find a solution, things would maybe look a little different. You might go out to a place like Coley, the Coley neighborhood, you might find the same thing. If it was someone's job, whose job is it really to strike that balance? As a lot of the immigrant communities out there in Coley, maybe out further in Southeast, as they're feeling the pinch of this rising cost of living, all sorts of change happening, there's maybe crime or safety issues they're dealing with. I wonder whose job is it to not repeat these same cycles over and over and over again. We've seen it here, we see it playing out. And so many of the issues that we're dealing with in Portland today, I feel, a lot of us at NECN, I know probably a lot of us City Club and in this room feel you can really draw a straight line from our form of government to those problems and the lack of a solution yet. Because there is no one's job to represent individual areas, who have to have those uncomfortable conversations, who have to answer their phone, who have to answer the door, who it is their job to represent just one community or collection of communities, a distinct geography. Now, coalitions fill that gap, but let me tell you, it's an imperfect system, highly imperfect. For one, we're a city function. We answer those calls. We do what we can. We try to help people. We support grassroots efforts. We provide grants. We do all this stuff. We do city functions, but we're chronically underfunded. Really, we're often overtaken by interest groups, you could say. One of the criticisms I know in the report that's can't argue with is many coalitions and neighborhoods are overtaken by neighborhood associations. And what that means is that most neighborhood associations are fine. Definitely, we work with them all the time. But there's always a few in the barrel, and it's. But it's important to understand that the reason this happens is there's a lack of voice. There's a lack of opportunity to express your voice, to get your needs met. You have a neighborhood association to go to, you have a coalition, and you have Wednesday afternoons at City Hall. We all know what happens Wednesday afternoon at City Hall, right? It's not pretty. But what happens if a government system doesn't give a voice to enough people who have legitimate problems, like we all do, legitimate gripes with the city? Who do we go to get those needs met, to get those questions answered? There's not much out there. We're sort of on our own. And you press that down long enough and anger arises. And then all sorts of mayhem takes place. And people start shouting at councilors and mayors and making it personal. It's not personal. It's a systemic issue. In almost every city, what the neighborhood system does that we're a part of, these would just be functions of government. It's that simple. Maybe, I don't know, Galveston, though. That was a new one. I want to just say, if we're going to strike this campaign, we're going to keep going, we should be a bumper sticker that says, man, if Texas can do it. Because, for real. So here's the thing. All that being said, one thing we know at NECN, we've been working on this issue a lot. We've spent some very hard, rigorous research making a cat video to explain our government to the average person, because the average person likes cat videos. But here's the thing. If we are successful, if we did overthrow the government in this very boring way, we're out of a job. We become redundant. We know that. The coalition system, in a lot of ways, in most ways, would cease to exist because, if done right, most of our functions become commissioner's office, things like that. So I don't say any of this lightly, but we should overthrow the government. So we're on board. We're on board, and fire us if you have to. It's and really, in all seriousness, it's about what's doing right for the city as a whole. That's why so many of us, anyone who does any sort of public service or anything else like that, that's why we wake up in the morning. It's about doing what's right for the city as a whole and solving all the inequities that the system causes. So we're on board. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. I think your picture's just fine, by the way. And I also appreciate that you actually took them seriously when they said, no, wear a purple top. It'll be perfect with the background. So well done for listening. I would like to now invite up somebody who's going to speak to us about the problems of turf wars and government inefficiency. And believe me, she has the experience to know it in this city. Please join me in welcoming Levon Griffin-Valade, a former auditor for the city of Portland.
I feel kind of like I was invited here to be the grouchy auditor contingent. Good evening. My name is Ashley Levon Griffin-Valade, but that's okay. I served as the city auditor from 2008 through 2014. I chose not to run for office again because the city's entrenched bureaucracy is a nightmare. I bet some of you have felt that way too. Instead of the city that works, I have an alternative, albeit much longer slogan to suggest. The city that works very, very, very slowly. But check back next year, someone else might be in charge. Voters recently approved changes to the charter to increase the auditor's independence. Those changes hopefully alleviated some of the bureaucratic burden for the current auditor. But the staff in almost every other bureau continues to slog through the morass of procedural mud, the outcome of which is inefficiency that often results in lost productivity and a lack of responsiveness to the public. A prime example of bureaucracy undermining efficiency at the city is the virtually non-stop budget cycle. The official budget calendar generally runs from early February through mid-June, but depending on the size and complexity of a bureau, most bureaus begin their formal budget process in September, October, or November of the previous year. That means a budget cycle of 8 to 10 months for most bureaus. Once bureaus submit their budget request, so here's where I get grouchy. The budget office, which essentially answers to all 5 members of council, offers a sort of thumbs up or thumbs down on every bureau's requested budget, which carries a great deal of weight with council members as they consider the requests. This occurs despite the fact that the budget office analysts have only peripheral knowledge of bureau operations. In a 2014 audit of the budget process, several council members admitted that the budget office's analysis was more important than the information submitted by bureaus, in spite of the 8 to 10 months bureau managers and program financial experts spent to develop and clarify those requests. The long budget process can wear on council members too. They have a political stake in the bureaus within their portfolios. This allegiance to their assigned bureaus sparked turf battles between council members over the services and programs, what services and programs should be protected from funding cuts and or deserving of additional dollars. Turf battles happen outside of the budget process too. We audited Portland Fire and Rescue's response time. We learned that fire held a long-running dispute with the Transportation Bureau over the installation of speed bumps and other traffic calming structures and the effect of those devices have on fire's response time. Well, in this situation, each commissioner in charge strongly supported the arguments of their respective bureaus, which made working together to resolve concerns all but impossible. We also audited what wound up to be a turf battle that's highlighted in the City Club report between the Transportation Bureau and the Bureau of Environmental Services regarding the cost of transportation's provision of street cleaning services to BES. We recommended that the commissioner in charge of each bureau instruct directors to work together and address several inefficiencies we had identified in the arrangement. Do you think that happened? Hardly more than a year later, though, each bureau had a new commissioner in charge who had a different vision and agenda in mind. The commission form of government compounds Portland's bureaucratic inefficiencies. We looked at the implementation of the city's business system software. By the way, the title of that audit report was Expensive, Late, and Incomplete. The project was supposed to cost $14 million, which sounds like a lot to me, and take 14 months to implement, but costs exceeded $47 million. And it took 30 months to go live. And at the go live stage, many of the planned functions were not yet available to city users, or they were dropped altogether. One of the most serious problems in the project was the multiple layers of decision-making. In the middle of the decision-making structure were the bureaus, each council member, in each council member's portfolio, all with different levels of understanding and project buy-in. At the top was City Council, ill-informed, lacking in expertise, and struggling to get a handle on this immense and expensive technology project. So my primary goal tonight has been to touch on bureaucratic inefficiencies within city government. I hope I've given you a sense of the stranglehold on good governance and the role that operating under a commission form of government plays in creating that stranglehold. Portland needs a city council focused on legislative and public policy matters, as well as long-term planning and constituent services. Portland needs, or should I say, cries out for, a professional manager who is focused on managing bureaus. And finally, the public needs and deserves a city that really works, meaning it is well managed, responsive, streamlined, and transparent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Levon, and sorry for the name gaffe. I've read it a number of times on my ballot, but so that was interesting. I thought, like, right, okay, so Levon was elected and she also had the expertise, city auditor, like that. I get it, right? Like, that's what Galveston meant, kind of. Just didn't happen totally with the other positions. But we have the opportunity to hear next from somebody who, if we had kind of fully played out the Galveston model and we're looking for a parks director, had the expertise, and I don't know, maybe even would have even tried to run for the position, but didn't have to because that's not the way it worked here. So let's hear next from Mike Abate, the former director of the Parks Bureau. He's going to talk to us about how the commissioner's lack of expertise at times, this isn't personal, guys, affects the bureaus they run. Mike.
Thanks, Zeke. Misha, the revolution. Everybody wants a revolution, but nobody wants to do the dishes, right? What we're talking about is doing the dishes. That's why it's a little bit boring, but it's really important because you got to deal with this. Well, I'm guessing most of you have heard about the visionary 1903 Olmsted Plan for Portland, right? Anybody? How about a shout out for the Olmsted Plan? The Olmsted brothers, sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of Central Park in New York City, put together a roadmap for a park system that would connect all Portlanders with this natural beauty that we find around us. And there was one person in particular who was instrumental in developing and implementing that plan. You may not have never heard of him. I think he's one of our great unsung heroes. Emmanuel Misch was a landscape architect at the Olmsted Brothers firm when the plan was being developed. And he was working in Madison, Wisconsin when, okay, a shout out for Madison? All right. He was working in Madison when the city of Portland lured him away as the park superintendent in 1908. Now, you probably haven't heard of his name. Someday we're going to name a park after him, I certainly hope. But you probably know of Laurelhurst Park and Peninsula Park, which is our first rose garden and the center of the Rose Association's activities. He also designed, let's see, I mentioned Peninsula Park, Mount Tabor Park, Columbia Park. He had a huge influence on our park system starting in 1908. But remember that date, because in 1913, something changed, right? We all know what happened. We went to a commission form of government. So Misch found himself no longer working for the Parks Commission. As a matter of fact, the Parks Commission had been abolished. He was now working for Commissioner William Brewster, who had been assigned by the mayor to run the Parks Bureau. Well, Misch lasted less than a year in the commission form of government. He was frustrated by the lack of understanding and vision of his commissioner, and progress on the plan had stalled, and he began to feel like he couldn't do his job effectively. So he resigned and headed to Los Angeles, where he went on to other great things. More than 100 years later, we know now that Misch's experience is not unique. What are you talking about? Commissioners often have little or no experience as a chief executive officer or a chief operating officer of a big organization, the complex organization. Bureaus typically, a big bureau has hundreds or even thousands of employees, budgets in excess of $100 million, multiple labor unions with a wide diversity of employees, and many other complexities. That's just one bureau. It's a big organization. And also, commissioners almost never have the professional training, education, knowledge, or expertise in the service of the bureau that they are overseeing, right? It was initially imagined in Galveston, and this is where we would bring the folks that really had expertise. That would make our government more efficient, but that's not the way Portland's developed. Some commissioners recognize that they'll be more successful by focusing on policy issues, taking a hands-off approach, and trusting staff to manage day-to-day details, but many don't, and they struggle to effectively provide core services. And regardless of the approach a commissioner might take, every election and every time the mayor changes bureau assignments, bureau staff are left scrambling as priorities and approaches change, sometimes drastically. Staff are pulled in one direction, only to wake up the next morning and get pulled in another direction. And sometimes those transitions are a year or less. The whiplash effect, combined with the tendency of commissioners to think of the bureaus they oversee as their bureaus, discourages collaboration and encourages silos. And those of you, I know we have many people in the audience who are former City of Portland employees. That's something we hear often by both Portlanders and government insiders, is that things are siloed. I think Levon's message about the Fire Bureau and PBOT is a perfect example of that. Now, one of the experiences I had is as bureau directors, the bureau directors get along great, but they're always taking the temperature of their bosses, the commissioners. If your commissioner and my commissioner are at odds on something completely unrelated to something you and I are talking about, we're going to have to put our collaborative multi-bureau solution on hold until that conflict has worked itself out. It's very difficult to develop sort of forward-thinking and citywide solutions in that environment. The tendency of 5 individual fiefdoms makes city budget making, as Levon just shared, very, very difficult. Commissioners, when they work in the best interests of the bureaus they oversee, rather than the city as a whole, dollars aren't allocated with the big picture view of things, because it isn't anyone's job to care about what's best for everyone. And now the mayor gets a shot at it of proposing a holistic budget, but if the commissioners' priorities are different, the silos reappear. Now, Portland Parks and Recreation continues to have financial challenges as a part of the city government. And you've been reading the papers and seeing the news, as the recent discussions of a $7 million shortfall to fund all the services which Portlanders have come to expect. That's why many of us believe that in addition to a change in the city's form of government, it's time to consider a separate Parks and Recreation district. Talk to Ben, talk to Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec, talk to the city of Chicago, all who have effective parks districts. They have their own elected leaders, replacing city commissioners who are focused on their individual bureaus, silos, with an elected body whose sole responsibility to voters would be to ensure that Portland Parks and Recreation programs are managed well, are fiscally responsible, and meet the needs of a dynamic and changing community. It's time to think about a parks district too. Portland has a lot of talented people, including our elected officials, city staff, and community partners who are committed to making this city great. But the people at the highest levels, the bureau directors, the elected officials themselves, in private conversations will tell you that our commission form of government is problematic. Unfortunately, that form of government limits our potential, because city staff face so many barriers to doing their best work. It is time to make a change. And it's time to make a change because the city is changing. We're not who we were 106 years ago. We are different, and it's time for everybody's voice to be heard. So, thanks, and I look forward to answering questions later.
All right, thanks for keeping it real, Mike. We have one last problem to highlight about our current form of government, and that really gets at the heart of, I think, what most people expect from a city council, and that's hard for Portland commissioners to deliver, which is forward-thinking policy that addresses complex issues. So at that highest level, how difficult it is for our city council to actually deliver policy. So here to talk about that issue is someone who used to be skeptical about the new form of government, or a new form of government. And after the struggles of the last few years, he looks at it differently. So please join me in welcoming John Russell of Russell Development.
Thank you, Zeke. I'd like to have true confessions to start. For a brief moment, I thought I would leap to the stage like Jesse did. But a little bird over here said, Russell, you could do that 50 years ago. But so as Zeke said, I come to this meeting as a convert. For most of my adult life, I believed in our current form of government. In fact, when there was a ballot measure 15 years ago put forth by a real estate developer and his attorney, 5 of us were successful in defeating it. And there are two fundamental reasons that I opposed that measure to change to a strong mayor form of government. First of all, I had seen the city work beautifully when Neil Goldschmidt and Vera Katz were mayors. Yeah. Secondly, I have a fear of legislative bodies, which are a necessary part of a strong mayor form of government. So Goldschmidt almost single-handedly turned the city around. He replaced all the members of the Portland Development Commission and the Planning Commission. His administration is responsible for the light rail system, Tom McCall Waterfront Park, Pioneer Place, Pioneer Square, and many others. Each of those things was unbelievably disputed. Vera supported the tram that enabled the billions of investment in the South waterfront and resulted in vast hundreds of millions of dollars of tax increment. She rammed through the East Bank Esplanade, and I can remember she was vilified for that. She rammed through the Girding Theater and the Chinese Garden, despite significant opposition. But what I've come to realize is that Neil and Vera are irreplaceable. I don't think any of the subsequent mayors have had their vision and charisma. They're both remarkable people, and we're lucky to have had them. So I guess relying on our current form of government is like waiting for the second coming of Christ. So I've changed my mind. But secondly, I'd like to relate to a number of stories that resonate with me, how our form of government is dysfunctional. There should be a slide on the screen of Lawrence Halprin's forecourt fountain. Some people think of it as the most important fountain in the most important park in America in the last 100 years. But here's the problem. And you won't believe me, maybe you will believe this. The pumps for the fountain are maintained by the Water Bureau. The plants belong to the Park Bureau. Believe it or not, the light fixtures are the responsibility of PBOT. And I think the fundamental job of cleaning it up is the responsibility of the Maintenance Bureau. None of those bureaus have any responsible for the capital replacement. And that park is in sad shape, as we know. No one's in charge. Let me give you another example, and this, it's humorous in some respects. Mike Lindbergh, years ago, told me about an ordinance that he had proposed to put signs above the street signs in Chinatown that announced that was part of Chinatown. Ordinance passed, it was unanimous, but 6 months went by and Mike didn't see any of the signs. So he just chased the thing down, layer by layer by layer, found himself in the sign shop. And the guy in the sign shop said, "It's a bad idea. I'm not going to do it. And by the way, I don't even work for the bureau that you supervise. Go to hell, you can't fire me." So that's humorous, isn't it? Yeah. Yet another example is an old case of a firefighter receiving disability payments while he was working as a master chef. Well, the Fire Bureau is controlled by one member of City Council, and the HR Bureau, which administers that, and then the City Attorney are controlled by other council members. But secondly, I mentioned my fear of legislative bodies, but I just finished a book called The Quartet, about the 4 key people responsible for forming our national form of government, namely the Constitution. What I had never realized is that it took a dozen years between the end of the Revolutionary War and our Constitution being formed. And actually, there were 2 states, New York and Virginia, that didn't even want a national form of government. Madison, who was given most of the credit, was trying to come to grips with what democracy really is. So he sees a Vermont town where every voter is present in the room, they all hear the same information and they all vote. That's democracy. But how do you deal with democracy, in his case, with widely separated states, no social media, you have to communicate with horses. So he ended up with what he called a process of filtering. So local issues would get dealt with locally, and those issues would get filtered up to the next layer and the next layer and the next layer, and that's what we call representative democracy. And that has changed my idea of council members being elected at large. if council members are elected by district, those real issues have a source. And maybe just as important, the people in those districts believe that they have a representative. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as the races remain nonpartisan, I have confidence that they'll work well. And I think Portland feels stuck, at least it does to me. We're adrift. We can't seem to find a way to deal with the challenges in front of us. But when I look around at all the talented people in the city, elected and appointed, I don't think it's a lack of ability that has us stuck. It's the way our system of government gets us caught up in unnecessary complications around the day-to-day stuff. It doesn't give our leaders room to think bigger. Our recent mayors and city council members may not be as great at cutting through the noise of the commission system as Neil and Vera, but they have potential, and it's been disappointing to see year after year how that potential gets wasted. We can't keep going this way. We clearly need to make a change. But one additional thought, and it may be the most important of all. The five of us who 15 years ago successfully defeated the prior ballot measure believed that the process was defective. It was seemingly drafted on the back of a napkin by two people with no public process to develop it. And I think back to the 12 years that it took to develop our national constitution. And I think we have to recognize that getting this right is critical, and details matter. It's terribly important that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that we're happy with our new form of government because we're going to be stuck with it for the next 100 years. And it's, in my mind, the only way that happens is with a robust, transparent, lengthy process where citizens are heard in venues all around the city, Friday nights, Saturday nights, in times that are convenient for people to attend. And I think ultimately we should decide on the timing of an election and work back with a detailed schedule of how we got there. What's significant about tonight is the City Club could have just published the report, but instead, I applaud the City Club for using this public process to start what I hope to be a robust and transparent civic process. So congratulations to the City Club. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the shout out for the City Club. I love looking in this room, although as I acknowledged before, I can't actually see you. But I can when I'm down there, and I love looking in this room and seeing the breadth of experience that this represents in terms of our City Club. Many folks who've been with City Club for a long time, and many folks who just signed up today or are considering signing up today, which you can do in the back of the room. So if you're not a City Club member, we welcome you here, and you have an opportunity to be one. We're going to take a quick intermission. Before we do, I'll just let you know when we come back, we're going to hear specifically about the report and the recommendations and findings from the group that put that together, and then you'll have an opportunity to both share some input with us and to ask some questions of the panelists. So watch the lights as they flicker in the back, because that'll tell you we're getting back to it. So this will be quick. Thank you. Find those seats. We'll get started here again. Welcome back. I know I look like a rock star, but you're actually here for the City Club's evening about the Portland system of government. You're welcome to stay if you came for the rock show, but it may be slightly different than that. All right, I want to do a few things. I want to make sure that we can hear about the report. I want to make sure we have some opportunity to hear from you all, and I want to make sure that we get a chance for people to begin their voting, and I want to make sure we all get out of here at a reasonable hour. So, as you're still getting your seats, I will acknowledge when I was up here earlier, I had mentioned that I had an anecdote that I wasn't going to share because I didn't know who was in the audience. I am still not going to share the anecdote. I will admit that I got a text that said, I don't see any city councilors in the audience, but there are at least 3 former chiefs of staff here, and we're with you. So that was good. I see there's a former first lady that's in the audience. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just telling you that there's folks here. I saw another auditor. The auditors are always the hardest to pick out. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's at least one other auditor here. There are 2 other auditors here, which is totally no surprise, is it? Right? Like, of course the auditors show up for this thing. Thank you for being here, all 3 of you. I didn't see any. Yep, that's it. We can do that. Thank you all for coming out, those who are invested in where we're headed and have been invested in where we were. I didn't see any city council members, but that's okay. All right, great. So we are back at it. You've heard about the history. We've heard about some of the problems, both historically and in the present day. And I don't know about you, but I think it's time we talk about where we might go from here. So, to start that, I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming Amanda Menjares to the stage. Amanda was the vice chair of the committee that did all this great research. So she is representing a whole bunch of folks who did a lot of hard work to get us here. So Amanda, you're up.
Zeke is very tall. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming. I feel like to the folks who said this was not quite the revolution, this was the boring revolution, I'm really excited to be here. As somebody who volunteered a year of their life to think about this, I'm really excited about this event. So thank you all for coming. Also want to thank the City Club for hosting this incredible event and for investing in this important conversation. So thank you to the City Club. And thank you to my fellow committee members who are in the audience today who were incredible to work with. You know, we talk a lot about equity and outcomes and whether we're all being equitably represented, but the process matters, and in pulling together this committee, we had a really great, diverse committee, primarily comprised of women, and I'm really proud to be part of that group and just want to give a round of applause to folks here today. So now that all of the speakers ahead of me did my job for me, I don't have to convince you, which is really exciting. I'm going to talk a little bit about our process and our findings and what hopefully many of you have already read through. It's a 35-page report, not 120, which is usually what these reports are. But, going to talk a little bit about what is the best form of government for Portland in terms of representation, and that matters. So what we found in our process is that Portland, as we all know, has a very unique form of government that's at best confusing and at worst actually leaves a huge chunk of our population out of the process in terms of how we have voice and how our city works. So our research committee actually engaged in a year-long process where we reviewed existing research, we dug into some of the archives, we uncovered legal precedents, we brought in a diversity of folks from the community to talk to us about their experience, some of them you heard from today. And the City Club gave us a very specific charge. They asked us to look at whether our commission form of government equitably represents all residents in the city of Portland. Spoiler, it doesn't. They asked us if it doesn't, what is the best form of government for Portland in terms of representation, and how should we choose our elected representatives? So in receiving that charge and in looking at our incredible committee, we realized that we were all coming in with very different experiences around how we define equity. And so myself, at the time, I was the advocacy director for the Coalition of Communities of Color, and so was living in racial equity every day in advocacy and how I was engaging with city government, folks at the state level. But other folks had jobs that didn't require them to sit with those definitions. So we decided to come to a shared definition of what equity meant. So in true City Club fashion, decided to bring in the experts to talk to us about what equity looks like in research, what equity looks like in the Office of Equity and Human Rights. We actually received a definition from the office and decided to adapt it to our process. And equity can be pretty complex because it isn't a clear, streamlined definition. It applies to both outcomes, which are more visible sometimes in stats and how we achieve policy, but it's also equity in process. And sometimes that's the part of equity that we don't talk about. But we know that in order to achieve equity, we need to make sure that everybody's involved and included. So we came up with 5 questions that we applied to our research. So the first question was, does our current system actually lead to more diverse candidates and elected officials? Second, are the policy outcomes equitable? And in that, we're looking at disparities between groups, but we're also looking at disparities in terms of how resources are allocated across the city. Third, does the system actually encourage greater voter participation? Fourth, is the system responsive? Is it meeting the needs of day-to-day or citizens on a day-to-day basis? Is it effective? Is it efficient? And does the process actually maintain equity long-term? Oftentimes in this area, we see folks who, see a disparity, get a little smaller, and it's a job well done. We wanted to make sure that we were putting a system in place that was going to have a strong trajectory towards creating a more equitable process for the long term. So we applied these questions to our current form of government. As folks here mentioned, we have a model where we're asking our commissions to have, or our commissioners have an executive function. They're running these huge multi-million-dollar bureaus. They're also given legislative functions. They're called upon to create policy, to vote on budgets. They also have quasi-judicial functions, and so, as Kristen mentioned, they're called upon to look at issues around land use and to be deciders in that space. We also applied these questions to how we elect our commissioners, which is through an at-large voting system. And for those of you who aren't familiar, and I know we heard a few different anecdotes about how that plays out, that basically means that every eligible voter in Portland is voting on every commission seat. So again, to go back to what Kristen was saying, that essentially means our very white political majority is voting for every commission seat. I moved here from Portland I moved here from New Mexico about 5 years ago, worked on some campaign finance legislation there. I was shocked. I was startled that we had an at-large voting system here, because those are systems that we see struck down across the country as voter suppression tactics, as systems that have been put in place to keep people of color out of the process. So I'm going to be presenting our findings and recommendations, and these were based on a unanimous decision within our committee. We recognize as a committee there's no perfect system, so we're actually hoping that this is the start to a longer conversation and a more robust and transparent process in terms of how we actually get to policy change, to a potential ballot initiative, or, in thinking about the timing of this research, how we can influence a Charter Review Commission to think about some of the inequities in our system. Are you guys ready for it? Yeah? All right. So first finding. First, we looked at the commission form of government, which, as I mentioned, has these commissioners with multiple functions, and determined that it is not only ineffective and inefficient, it's deeply inequitable. When do commissioners have time to engage with constituents as they're running these very large bureaus? Whom do they represent? And as somebody who has run many candidate elections, I can say that it's probably their donors. Are they qualified to run these bureaus? We heard different conversations about folks who are often elected without any managerial experience or any subject matter expertise. And while we have many talented leaders in our commission, we believe that's too much to ask of anyone. We also heard about how it can create gridlock in the system and bureaus competing against one another. So our first recommendation is that we actually switch to a council manager system where a professional city manager would be responsible for overseeing city bureaus. The city's executive functions would actually be concentrated in the mayor's office. The mayor would be responsible for hiring and firing the city manager with the approval of the council. The mayor would serve as a permanent chair of the council, which is what we've seen in other cities, and would provide a tie-breaking vote. This would allow city councilors to focus more on engaging with everyday Portlanders, engaging in constituent services, legislating, developing budgets, and setting a strategic vision for the city. So, recommendation number 1. Second, in our current system, we have 4 city commissioners plus a mayor for a city that's of over 600,000 residents. That number has grown from 200,000, which is how many people lived in Portland over 100 years ago when this system was put into place. And we know that number is growing. So that basically, calculates out, if we were just to divide the city of Portland amongst our commissioners currently, it would be 1 commissioner to every 120,000 residents. That is completely out of whack with anything we've seen across the country. And through this process, again, as we applied these equity considerations, we did a lot of research and even set up subcommittees to actually try to find a place where we could see a similar ratio. So our second recommendation is that we expand the commission to at least 8 to 12 representatives plus a mayor, voted on at large. And we recognize that there is no magic number. I appreciate all of the data that Kristen's brought and the maps that she put up. But as we're going through a districting process, we would look at the demographics and the growth in Portland and need a deeper dive. But we definitely know it's more than 4. So we should grow that number. So next, we looked at how we choose our city council members. So keeping in mind that the commission form of government is linked to these at-large voting systems, as Kristen mentioned, you end up with the situation where in order to get to district-based elections, we have to transform our commission. So going back to our equity lens, this system already fails the first question on every level. It does not lead to racial diversity, geographic, economic diversity. And when we started this research process, we actually, at that point, only had ever had 7 women serving on the commission, and only 2 people of color serving on the commission in office. Both were African-American men. If I'm correct, I think 1 was actually appointed. And all of the commissioners at that point lived on the west side. Again, shocking to me as a New Mexican moving to the city of Portland. So our third recommendation is that recognizing that voting at large is a barrier for equitable representation, we should move from an at-large election system to district-based elections, which would automatically ensure geographic representation. But given how people of color and our communities are dispersed across the city, we actually looked at a district-based model where we would draw larger districts around different parts of the city and allow multiple members to represent those districts. We recognize that at-large systems create a huge financial barrier for our folks to be elected into office, and running in districts, running in areas where they can represent their community would create more opportunity. We also recommended that folks, so I will say that's our third big recommendation, is to move to a district-based model, but not the ones, a traditional one that you've seen before, where one person represents one area. We also did call on the City Club to look at different voting methods, recognizing it was a little bit outside of our charge, but we did do a little bit of research in that area that you can see in the report, where we're asking them to study instant runoff voting, where we might essentially combine primary and general elections which we believe would increase voter participation, and looking at options like ranked choice voting, which could also lead to more opportunities for more diverse candidates to be elected. So with that, I want to thank the City Club again for supporting us as we carried out the research and for creating spaces like this where we can have these conversations about the challenges our city is facing. And just to say that I've enjoyed this research process immensely. I love overthrowing government this way. It's very exciting for me. And now, because I was told how much City Club loves parliamentary procedure, I'm going to make a motion for the Portland City Club to accept the research committee's recommendations, which are, again, 1, to shift to a council manager system with a professional city manager, expand the commission to 8 to 12 representatives, and create district-based elections, preferably with multiple members representing each district. Thank you.
Awesome. I think I'm supposed to ask, is there a second for the motion? It has been seconded by multiple members. The voting is now formally open, although not officially open in this venue because we have another part of our agenda, but we will soon have an opportunity for people to vote right here. Thanks, Amanda. That was awesome. It was really impressive work that this committee did. I was also impressed that that you were able to get so much into 35 pages. As a former research committee chair, I think our committee report was 98 pages. So I appreciated the brevity, but also the succinct and exciting information that was there. So I want to call up a number of the folks who we already heard from: Kristen, Jesse, Misha, Lavon, Mike, John, and Amanda. I think that's everybody except for Colin. Also, I think Julia's going to join us. We have 6 chairs. I think 7 of you are come on up, everybody, are going to come up here. I don't need a chair. Somebody else might choose to stand as well. So here's how this is going to work. We've got a few minutes, a little more than a few, to hear some additional voices from folks that are in the crowd. We want to give an opportunity for people to identify whether they are approving of the recommendation and the report and or rejecting, both of which are your civic right and responsibility here as a part of a City Club member. So take that opportunity. As I said earlier, we're going to ask you to hold your comments/questions to 60 seconds. And if you actually go much beyond 60 seconds, your mic is going to go. So it's really in your interest to make sure that you get that statement in the time that you have available to you. We'll smile at you still, but we won't hear from you. We've got mics on either side of the stage. To my left and your right is the place to go if you would like to indicate your approval of the report. To my right and your left is the reject microphone. And the way it's going to work up here is that if and as people ask questions, this is the moment when you can actually come up to the microphones as well. If and as people ask questions, we'll just ask you to come up to one of these mics. I'm sorry that you guys got to stand behind me, or sit behind me. One of these mics and respond. This could be the first time in the history of the City Club that there's not like huge lines forming. Where's Steve Novick? There should be people lining up and ready to speak. We have our first City Club member who's ready to speak. You're on.
Hi there. I'm Robin Denberg, and I'm a City Club member. I just joined tonight. I do appreciate what the committee has done, and I do feel that we need a change in the form of government. However, why do you recommend an unelected city manager system when the overwhelming majority of other large cities don't use that system and instead use a mayor-council system? I would like to see a more complete report on the pro and con of an elected mayor-council versus unelected city manager system. The main reason stated in the report against the mayor-council system is that there were 2 failed ballot measures, though it did not mention that those reform efforts were many years ago, poorly drafted, too complex, and not well-run nor funded campaigns. In short, past campaigns for a change of government aren't applicable to the present conversation. The only other reason given in the report, and I'm paraphrasing, was that a mere 14 people who were interviewed by the committee, nearly half of them electeds or former elected officials, didn't like that method. There was not significant analysis done, and I'd like to see that done for the report. Thank you. And I'd love to see a response as well.
I'm going to speak for the council, or for the research committee, and also phone friends, because I know you're still out there on the research committee. So if I understand the question is why we made a recommendation to move to a city manager form versus a different form?
And why a full analysis was not done, it was dismissed in the report.
A full analysis on why to move to a city manager form?
Looking at pros and cons of a mayor council system versus a unelected city manager system.
We actually did do a robust process in going to that. We actually had a subcommittee that looked at that question specifically, and I think part of it, that was actually part of the debate in the research committee, is do we remove a layer of accountability if we move to a city manager process? And I think part of the concern was, you know, you don't get to elect this person or hire and fire that person. And so I think based on our analysis and where we landed with that was in having the mayor be responsible for oversight of the city manager, we would actually have a layer of accountability, but also have somebody in place who would outlast the political process and somebody who can be in place to be part of implementing a longer-term strategic plan. And in looking at other cities the size of Portland, we saw robust use of the city manager function. And so we felt like that was probably a better option for Portland.
Great, thank you for coming on up and asking the first question. I should clarify too, if you don't actually know yet how you land on this question, but you have a question, you are also welcome. You can come to either side and we won't hold it against you. You're up.
Well, you basically read my mind. I wish I could position the microphone in the center of the stage. My name is John Rhodes. I actually just moved to Portland from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If this is the kind of event that the City Club of Portland throws, I'm definitely going to become a member. This is great. I am looking at this through the lens as a Pittsburgher, and our city changed from at-large members to district members in the 80s, and that was really helpful in terms of increasing diversity on council. Our population is about 25% African American, and now there are consistently about 2 out of 9 members who are African American. The one pushback against doing district in total is that before, having at-large members provided a certain level of accountability to the one at-large or elected official, which was the mayor. And so now in Pittsburgh, there's less of somebody who is able to challenge the mayor. So my question is, do you consider a combination of both district and at-large members that might provide that accountability?
I'm just going to be in a debate up here. Thank you for the question. We actually had another subcommittee that went into that question because in Seattle, for example, and in Yakima, Washington, and other cities, we saw models where folks had a combination of at-large and district elections. And I think we felt like that kind of had the worst of both versions. And so when you're looking at district-based elections, some of the issues folks have with it is that you don't have somebody who's looking at citywide priorities. In a city like Portland, maybe people of color get 1 seat on the council. At large, you again lose a little bit of accountability to those particular priorities. You lose some representation in those as well. So we did a pros and cons weighing of that, which is how we actually landed on these larger districts where you actually have multiple people who are accountable to an area, which can be a counterweight for somebody who's at large, which is going to be the mayor. For example, we're still recommending that the mayor remain at large. And I think with that, you get folks within that where some people are thinking about citywide priorities. Some people might have, different expertise in areas. Somebody might be amazing at parks, and they're part of that slate of folks representing that area. So we wanted to create a system where multiple people can represent different parts of the city and bring those diversity of perspectives to the table.
Let me give you another response to that. This is more of a story. A friend of mine, Tuck Wilson, was responsible for a lot of stuff in TriMet. And Portland was so successful at TriMet of saying, we'll do light rail this direction, but then maybe it's our turn next. Seattle, that region was given $500 million to spend on light rail. And at the end of the process, they had spent the $500 million and not laid a foot of light rail. The reason is, when Tuck went up, Tuck was hired by Seattle to figure out what did Portland do right and Seattle did wrong. Every member of the TriMet, the equivalent in that district in that region was elected by district. And every member of TriMet, of that district, every district member in Seattle wanted a plan for their light rail in their district. $500 million later, there's nothing laid. So there is a value, I think, in an at-large component of democracy.
You're up, sir.
Thank you. My name's Albert Kaufman, and I just love being in this theater. Isn't this place beautiful? I'm not a reject or an accept. I think generally, actually, it sounds very good to me, what the committee has come up with. And I've lived here for 18 years. Before that, I lived in Seattle. And when I go to Seattle with their form of government, I see a city that is just hell-bent on changing things very quickly. And so I would sort of think in a way, oh, well, Seattle's really the city that works, because, things are churning along. And here, most of my neighbors and friends are, we're getting, this is happening and that's happening. It's really quick change of development and change in our city. But actually, if you look at the two places, this place is, is really, this moves at a pace of molasses, if you ask me. And I would say that there's something to be said for the change going at the pace of molasses. Yes, my street doesn't get repaired very quickly, and yes, things don't change quickly enough, but at the same time, there could be a benefit to change not coming so quickly. So it's more of a commentary if anyone wants to speak to that.
It's a good question or commentary. I think the thing I would say is two things. I live out in East Portland now. If you go out there, there are miles of roads that are unpaved. That's way too slow, right? It's 2019. But also I think the even more important point is Seattle's a much bigger city. But that's where we're going. Like it or not, the growth that's coming to Portland is going in that direction, and I think it's a matter of adapting for that future, really it's the present, and making sure the kind of wheels and gears of government can move a lot faster than they have. 20, 30 years ago, I think we've kind of got away with it for a while. And I think a lot of what we're seeing now in the last 5, 10, 15 years is catching up to us. The system we have isn't designed for how kind of developed and the size of the city that we're growing into. And that's a lot of where the pain points are that we're seeing.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Misha. So I think if you are in line right now, awesome. If you're not, there was lots of opportunity to get in line. This is not like a typical City Club event. I do want to just acknowledge Stacy is keeping time for you in a helpful way. So just as you're kind of going through your what you're saying, pay attention to Stacy, because she'll give you the kind of very eloquent hook. You're up next.
My name is Neil Chodorow, and I also just joined this evening to the City Club. I'm very much, having read through your report before coming tonight, I'm very much in favor of the district model for elections. If nothing else, it would lead to geographic equity and representation, which I think is the first step. If the districts are designed or drawn properly, it will also lead to some of the other forms of equity that we're looking for. But the key there, and this is the question I had for the committee, is did you look at different models of how to divide this city into 4, 5, or 6 districts? Because I think that would determine partly how many members you had per district? And also, would you have a mechanism in place for adjusting the size or outlines of the districts as population changes over time?
So I'm going to ask Kristen to answer that question only because she came in and did provide us with different models. And just want to reiterate that this was based on great data that Kristen was able to provide for our committee, but we didn't have a demographer, for example. So we didn't have the opportunity in our research process to actually, sorry, I hear the feedback, to actually look at those numbers, but that's part of the districting process. And just to remind folks, we're going through our census process now. Redistricting is going to be happening. Oregon is probably going to get another congressional, very likely going to get another congressional district. So this is part of a process that we all need to be considering, but in terms of your question, would definitely hand it over.
Hello? So I did a bunch of different maps of, 4 districts, 5 districts, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think I went up to 12, and then multi-winner districts, just to sort of see, like, if you draw it this way, what happens. And as I said, there's no minority-majority district, but a benefit of multi-winner districts is, well, 2 benefits. One, even if people of color are not in a majority, if in the district they're 1/3, and that district is electing 3 people, they can elect 1 of the 3 because they're 1 out of 3 of the people in that district. The other benefit of multi-winner districts with some alternative form of voting is the district lines matter a lot less than they do with single winner districts. So part of what gives gerrymandering its power is that there's just 1 person winning per district. So if you bump out this neighborhood or cut this one out, you can change the result. You can change 100% of the result. You can flip it from one to the other. But if there's 3 people winning in that district and you bump out this neighborhood, well, maybe you can change 1, maybe, but you definitely can't change all 3 of the results in that district. So I don't know what the best way to do it, but I do know that the districting process is not always responsive to the values of the community. And so having a districting process that's a little more resistant to gerrymandering and a little more likely to get you fair representation no matter who's drawing the lines is more robust.
Without regard to the merits of the question, I think it's thrilling to me that these kinds of I-dottings and T-crossings are being discussed in a public forum rather than a smoke-filled room. And I just hope that we can continue this process right to the bitter end.
Thanks for that, John. So we've got one more question over here, and then we've got 2 more questions over here.
All right. I'm Sarah Wolk. I'm from Northeast Portland. Grew up just walking distance from here, and I'm executive director of the Equal Vote Coalition, which is an Oregon-based nonprofit focused on fighting for equality in the voting franchise itself. So essentially what that means is that every vote is equal. Your vote's not going to get wasted. The system's not playing favorites. And what we found is really a consensus among election reform, anyone who's looked at this at all. Our current system is the very worst voting method out there in terms of accuracy. It's in the trenches and fails because of factors like the spoiler effect. So my question to you is, when considering other voting systems, how committed are you to one that not only mitigates that equality issue and actually solves it? Like where every vote is mathematically equal. I'm very committed. Because, they're just, to elaborate on that, we're working on a proposal called star voting, which we would love to collaborate on for your deep dive.
I'll speak to that because we did consider star voting in the process. We had folks from the Star Voting Coalition come in and speak to that. I think our concerns on that particular piece is, one, we didn't actually get to the point of being able to evaluate all of the different voting methods, we considered them and included what we considered in the research process. I think there is a layer of complexity to that that we hope the next City Club committee will take on.
Yeah, well, your reform identified like the 3 things that Star Voting's best at. 1 is mitigating vote splitting. 2 was eliminating wasted votes. And yeah, so Star Voting does all 3 of those things.
Sure. Yes. So I'm Julia. I'm the executive director of City Club. And thank you all for being here. I just wanted to share based on that question, and I think Zeke mentioned it earlier, but our Board of Governors just last week approved our next research project, which we're going to be getting underway, and it's a real follow-up to this research report, asking exactly those questions. So doing a pretty broad survey of what alternative forms of voting exist, not only in the United States, but in local jurisdictions across the world, to very specifically asking the question, you know, what is the impact on both equity and just sort of governance functions based on those alternative forms of voting, and then 3, making recommendations. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Julia. So as John said earlier, robust public dialogue, awesome. I just want to say I know that there's a few more people than we're going to get to that have questions or comments, but this is not the last moment to do that. Julia just mentioned a great opportunity to engage, and there will also be other opportunities here. So here's what I want to do. We've got room for 2 more questions or comments. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that, and we won't answer the first question yet, because then I'm going to turn back to you all and just let if anyone who wants to do a quick reflection either on those comments or where we are, that would be great. And we'll do this in kind of lightning round fashion so that we can get to the voting. You're up next, sir.
All right. Thank you. This is more of a comment than a question, so hopefully go quickly. Kip Silverman, I just re-upped for City Club tonight because I was convinced to do so by Julia and others. I spent 4 months working City Hall, and I have appreciated how cathartic hearing everyone validating my experience has been. It's probably saved me thousands in therapy. So I do want to add, based on my experience, that given the current state of the city, which is really, really bad, I'd suggest city managers rather than a manager, and look at that. It's unique, but I think we're in a very deep state of dysfunction and might be required. I'd also suggest a much stronger auditor role in fixing the bureau balkanization while we switch to this new form.
Thank you. I know there are auditors in the room that agree with your last comment. One last set of comments or question. Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to get us so that we keep as many people in the room before we're done here. So I know these folks were up before. I see you, Gary. I love you. And we're going to go.
Hi, my name is Steve Colburn, and I'm a proud Portland resident and a resident of the Hollywood district as well. Up until tonight, I hadn't been a member of the City Club, but you all convinced me here tonight, so thank you very much. The question that I have is, at least I didn't hear it mentioned, is the effect of politics on the operations of the bureaus. We elect politicians. That's what we do. They tell us why we should vote for them because of their vision and their politics. And then they get installed as you mentioned, CEO and CFOs of these huge organizations. It seems to me that these the bureaus are the only outlet for which they can implement their politics. So what happens? They get politicized. So was this considered in what you were in the whole process? Thank you.
Thank you. It was awesome to hear all the new members as well. So I'm just going to give you all kind of a lightning round opportunity to respond. If you don't know what lightning round means, that means go really quick, as in like 10 seconds or less. Go.
I'll jump on that. It reminds me that the closest thing we have in the city of Portland to a city manager is the chief administrative officer. It's at least one in the room. But I want to talk about a different one, Fred Miller. Fred Miller was a chief administrative officer who works directly for the mayor and oversees human resources and budget and account, not budget, but finances and et cetera. It's the closest thing we have. Fred ran ODOT, fairly good size organization for the state. He ran PGE, fairly good size organization. He's a very, very talented leader. He talked to all of us bureau directors as equals, but there was always this kind of under the table conversation we would have about having a virtual city manager. And how could, in this case, Fred work that way? Well, he tried and tried and tried. And it was just a symptom that you can have a very talented person overseeing, trying to bring it all together, but all it takes is a couple of the elected officials having a different perspective, and that doesn't go anywhere. So that's my lightning round.
I don't know if I'd call that lightning, Mike. It's okay. Yes, it was thundering, it was rolling. Any other responses? I see you jumping in.
Yeah. So I'll respond and say, yes, we did consider it. We had a lot of incredible folks who came in and talked to us about their experience in lobbying these elected officials. We had many folks who had served on city commissions actually come in and talk to us as well. And so it was a major consideration. But I do want to emphasize that I don't think politics inherently is the problem. It's the process, right? We want to make sure that the people are actually involved in those decisions and solutions and bringing those ideas. Having charismatic leaders isn't necessarily a problem. It's giving them bureaus to use as leverage points is the problem. And so I think for us, we're looking for a more deliberative body.
One advantage of being my age is that you have a lot of stories to tell. And there's one that really is heartening to me. Jim Francisconi lost an election to Tom Potter, in large part, because he had amassed $1.3 million in contributions. And Tom Potter restricted his contributions to $25. So something at that point was working right.
So please help me in thanking all of our panelists for their participation tonight. We have one more part of our program. I would like to invite up Michael Alexander and Colin Crater, who are here to help us figure out where we go from here. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I'll just pull it. Well, I really can see you folks. So.
Beautiful people.
Okay. All right. Tonight we've been a part of something very special, and on this stage we've heard from a diverse group of individuals who bring unique perspectives to the city and who have all come to the same conclusion that Portland's system of government needs to be seriously evaluated. As a city, the size of Portland has tripled since 2013, but more important, the definition of who lives in Portland has undergone greater growth and diversification. Maintaining a static form of government while we evolve and diversify is not in accordance with the ambitions of the framers of our Constitution. I read somewhere where we sought to form a more perfect union, one that sought to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And our posterity. In 2019, our posterity demands that we place intentional focus on lifting the voices of all Portlanders in the electoral process, in promoting civic health and engagement, and most notably with an emphasis on underrepresented communities of difference, whether that difference be gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, race, culture, geography, or economic status.
Communities of consciousness are here tonight to say that it's time we work toward building a city that represents and serves us all. Because this is what democracy is all about. No matter who we are or where we've come from, we all need to know we have a voice in telling the story of where Portland is going.
An article written by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1963 bore relevance to the place that our city finds itself in today. The article was titled, quote, "In a Word, Now," end of quote. Dr. King wrote, "The long-deferred issue of second-class citizenship has become our nation's first-class crisis. We can deal with it now, or we can drive a seething humanity to a desperation it tried, asked, and hoped to avoid," end of quote. So today in this room, and shortly in this city, we will once again take up the mantle of reflection and self-assessment on what the inclusive, moral, and equitable path forward could and should be for Portland's structure of government. However you settle on this challenge, what is most important is that you weigh in and have your voice heard, because it's the only way we can either confirm that the current structure we have is serving our purpose, or course correct and navigate a road that this city will follow for decades to come.
I think it's important to acknowledge the small groups who have tried to change Portland's system of government in the past and failed because they thought they knew what was best for everyone else. We can't make real, lasting change that way. We're going to have to do this together, across generations, and across communities to build something that works for everyone.
The process may take time, but the first step is right now with you being here and participating in this conversation.
And it won't be the last conversation. City Club is planning to convene conversations in all 5 quadrants of our city to share its research and to hear your ideas about how to build a Portland we all deserve.
If you want to get involved, and we encourage you to, the first step is to vote for this research. When at least 2/3 of City Club members vote to adopt the research report, it then becomes the official position of City Club, and then the Advocacy Committee can begin laying the groundwork for changing this issue. If you're not a City Club member, now's a great time to join, and if you are, I think you will always be able to look back and say that you contributed to this historic moment and movement.
Once the votes have all been counted, it will take people power to make change happen. If you want to contribute time, energy, and a voice to this change, make sure you sign up to be on City Club's advocacy list at the back of the room. And we would love to be involved. The fundraiser in me also wants to pitch out that you should fund this work as well. You should.
It's not there. Okay. In our city's history, we've asked ourselves this question 8 times, whether we should remain on the same course or change the status quo. Within the next 2 years, our city is mandated to once again review this question. I'm reminded of a derivative of a Zen proverb that reads, "Fall 7 times and stand up 8." The meaning is not only about resilience, it's equally about transformation. We all want to live in a more equitable city. This is our chance to make real progress. Despite our history of falling down on this question 8 times, perhaps we are destined to stand up and remain standing on our 9th attempt. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for joining the conversation.
Thank you, Michael and Colin, for your impassioned plea. It is much appreciated. And I couldn't agree more. So we've heard about revolution. We've heard about Barbara Jordan. We talked about Galveston. And now we have a chance to kind of make this thing happen. So first, I want to just say thank you again to our panelists. Thank you to our research committee members. Thank you to City Club for putting this event on. How about a round of applause? Voting is open at the red light table. You're welcome to go start to vote. If you want to make a donation or still need to join City Club, they will more than be happy to help you at the back of the room. You can also vote on the research here still. The City Club, you heard about the process. And if you haven't actually seen the report, but you got really excited about it, it's really easy to get. You can go online to pdxcityclub.org/commission, and it's right there. Thank you for being here tonight. Be safe and have a great night, and hopefully we'll continue this dialogue as we move forward.